The sensor officer of the Crimson Empire's outer patrol station stared at his screen for a long moment. His four-clawed hands moved across the controls as he tried to understand what he was seeing. A ship had appeared from nowhere. It had come from a region of space that the Crimson Empire had marked as empty and worthless centuries ago. No civilizations existed there. No resources worth taking. Nothing but dead stars and cold rocks yet here was a ship. Officer. Draven checked his instruments 3 times before he believed them. The vessel was small, perhaps a kilometer in length. By Crimson standards, this was barely worth noticing. Their battle cruisers stretched for 5 kilometers. Their command carriers were even larger. But something about this little ship made Draven uncomfortable. Its energy signature was strange. It burned hot and steady, like a star compressed into metal. The design was unlike anything in the Crimson database, and that database contained records of over 400 conquered species. Draven sent his report up the chain of command. Within minutes, Admiral Vexer himself was looking at the same readings from his flagship, the Crimson Fiery. Admiral Vexer had served the Empire for 300 years. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had personally overseen the subjugation of 17 species. Fear was something he caused in others. He did not feel it himself. But as he studied the strange vessel, something cold touched the back of his mind. A warning from instincts older than civilization. He ignored it. He was Admiral Vexer. He feared nothing. On board the USS Resolute, Captain Daniel Hart stood at the center of the bridge and watched the alien stars through the main view screen. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and calm brown eyes that had seen many difficult things. His uniform was simple and practical, like everything else on the ship. Humanity had built the Resolute for function, not for show. Commander Lisa Monroe approached him with a tablet in her hands. She was his first officer, a woman of 40 with short, dark hair and a mind that worked faster than any computer. She had been with Hart for 6 years now, through training and testing and the long journey that had brought them here. Captain, we're picking up multiple vessel signatures. Dozens of them, converging on our position from the inner system. Her voice was steady, but Hart could hear the tension underneath. They had prepared for this moment. They had trained for years. But nothing could truly prepare a person for first contact with alien life. Hart nodded slowly. Any response to our greeting signal? Nothing yet, sir. Lieutenant Clark is monitoring all frequencies. At her station, Lieutenant Amy Clark pressed her headphones tighter against her ears. She was young, only 28, but she was the best linguistics expert humanity had produced in a generation. She had spent 3 years learning to recognize patterns in unknown languages. Now she listened to the void and heard only silence. They're not talking to each other on open channels, she reported. Either they're using encryption we can't crack, or they communicate in ways we don't understand yet. Chief Engineer Maria Santos called up from the engineering deck. Her voice came through the intercom, calm and confident. All systems are green, Captain. Reactor is stable. Shields are ready. Whatever's coming, we can handle it. Hart appreciated her confidence. Santos had helped design the Resolute's power systems. If anyone knew what the ship could do, it was her. The alien vessels grew closer. Hart counted 37 of them on the tactical display. They were of various sizes, from small scout ships to massive cruisers that dwarfed the Resolute. Their hulls were red and black, covered in strange symbols that meant nothing to human eyes. They moved in formation, spreading out to surround the human ship. They're boxing us in, said Lieutenant Kevin Brooks from the tactical station. He was a young man with quick hands and quicker reflexes. Classic encirclement pattern. Whoever these people are, they've done this before. Hart studied the formation. They're treating us as a threat. Or as prey, Monroe added quietly. The communication system crackled. Lieutenant Clark's eyes widened. "Captain, incoming transmission. Multiple frequencies, multiple languages. They're trying to talk to us." The message played through the bridge speakers. Harsh sounds, clicking and grinding, in patterns that repeated 17 times. Each repetition sounded different, but Clark recognized the structure. They were saying the same thing in different languages, hoping one would be understood. "I can't translate it yet," she admitted. "But based on the tone and repetition patterns, I'd guess it's a demand. They want something from us." Hard looked at the alien fleet surrounding his ship. 37 vessels against one. The odds seemed overwhelming. But Hart knew something the aliens did not. He knew what human engineers had built when they created the Resolute. "Send a response," he ordered. "Mathematical sequences. Prime numbers, then basic geometric formulas. Universal language of intelligence. Let's show them we're not primitives." Clark transmitted the signal. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the largest alien vessel, a massive cruiser at the center of the formation, began to move forward. It positioned itself directly in front of the Resolute, close enough that Hart could see the details of its hull through the view screen. Strange weapons ports lined its surface. Sensor arrays rotated like hungry eyes. "They're powering weapons," Brooks reported, his voice tightening. Hart raised his hand. "Hold steady. Don't react. Let's see what they do." The alien cruiser fired. A beam of superheated plasma, bright as a piece of the sun, lanced across the void and struck the Resolute directly. The bridge lights flickered for a moment. Hart gripped his command chair as the deck vibrated beneath his feet. Then silence. Stillness. Brooks stared at his console. Shields holding at 97%. Whatever that was, it barely touched us. Hart let out a slow breath. The aliens had fired on his ship. They had made their intentions clear. This was not going to be the peaceful first contact humanity had hoped for, but it would be a first contact they would never forget. He stood and straightened his uniform. 300 souls aboard his ship looked to him for guidance. Millions more back on Earth were counting on him, even though they did not know it yet. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies. Let's try one more time to talk. But Brooks, warm up the weapons. If they fire again, we respond." The Resolute hung in space, surrounded by enemies, alone and far from home. But Captain Daniel Hart was not afraid. He had seen the readings. He knew what his ship could do, and soon the Crimson Empire would know as well. High Sovereign Malloy sat upon the Crimson Throne, a seat carved from the bones of a conquered species that had dared to resist his ancestors. The throne room stretched before him, vast and dark, lit only by the red glow of ancient power crystals. Advisors and generals stood in neat rows, their heads bowed, waiting for his judgment. The report from Admiral Vexer had disturbed the High Sovereign greatly. A ship had appeared from empty space. It had survived a plasma lance that should have cut it in half. It had responded to their demands with strange mathematical signals, as if trying to communicate. As if it considered itself equal to the Crimson Empire. This could not be allowed. "Send the order," Malloy said, his voice echoing through the throne room. "Admiral Vexer will capture this vessel and bring its crew before me. I wish to see what manner of creatures dare to enter our space without permission." The order traveled across the void at the speed of light. Admiral Vexer received it on the bridge of the Crimson Fury and smiled with all 3 rows of his teeth. Finally, he had permission to act. The strange little ship would learn its place. On the Resolute, Captain Hart watched the alien fleet shift into a new formation. The movement was coordinated and precise, like predators preparing to strike. 37 ships against one. The math was simple. The math did not always tell the whole story. "They're preparing for a full attack," Lieutenant Brooks reported from the tactical station. His fingers danced across the controls, bringing weapon systems online. "I'm reading power surges across their entire fleet." Commander Monroe stood beside Hart, her face grim. "Captain, we need to make a decision. Fight or run?" Hart considered the options. The Resolute was fast, faster than anything in the alien fleet if his readings were correct. They could run, slip away into hyperspace, and return to Earth with news of what they had found. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. But Hart had been watching the tactical display. He had seen how the alien ships moved, how they communicated, how they positioned themselves. This was not an exploration fleet. This was a military force, organized and experienced. And they were treating the Resolute like prey. If humanity ran now, these aliens would follow. They would find Earth, and they would bring this same fleet, or one even larger. "We stand," Hart said quietly. "We show them what happens when they attack a human ship." Monroe nodded. She had expected this answer. "Rules of engagement? Disable only. I want their weapons gone and their engines crippled. But no killing unless absolutely necessary. We're not here to start a war." "Sir," Brooks said, "they've already started it. Then we'll finish it. On our terms." The alien fleet fired. All 37 ships unleashed their weapons at once. Plasma beams, missiles, kinetic rounds, energy pulses. The void between the fleets lit up like a storm of fire. Every weapon was aimed at the Resolute, a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm any defense. The Resolute's shields absorbed the assault. Energy rippled across the barrier, blue lightning dancing against the attack. Inside the ship, the lights flickered once, then steadied. Chief Engineer Santos watched her displays with professional calm. "Shield capacity at 89%, she reported. "They hit us with everything they had, and we barely felt it." On the alien flagship, Admiral Vexer watched the impossible happen. The small vessel should have been vapor. It should have ceased to exist. Instead, it hung in space, untouched, as if mocking the power of the Crimson Empire. "Fire again," he ordered. "All ships continuous fire." The fleet obeyed. Wave after wave of destruction poured toward the Resolute. And wave after wave was swallowed by those strange blue shields. Captain Hart had seen enough. "Brooks, begin targeting their weapon systems." "Santos, give me everything the engines have." "Monroe, coordinate damage control teams." The Resolute moved. It did not drift or crawl like the alien vessels. It accelerated with a speed that made Admiral Vexer gasp. One moment it was surrounded. The next it was inside the formation, moving between the larger ships like a fish swimming through slow-moving currents. Weapons. Officer Paul Graham had been waiting for this moment his entire career. His hands moved across the firing controls with the precision of a surgeon. The Resolute's railgun spoke, and tungsten rounds traveling at a fraction of light speed crossed the void in heartbeats. The first alien ship lost its main cannon. The round punched through the weapon mount and continued out the other side, leaving a hole the size of a house. The ship spun wildly as its crew struggled for control. The second ship lost its engine array. Graham had placed the shot perfectly, cutting power lines without hitting the reactor. The vessel went dark and began to drift. The third, fourth, and fifth ships fell in quick succession. Graham was not trying to destroy them. He was dismantling them, piece by piece, taking away their ability to fight while leaving their crews alive. Lieutenant Clark watched the battle from her station, but her attention was divided. She had been recording the alien communications throughout the engagement, and patterns were beginning to emerge. Their language was harsh and complex, but it followed rules like any other language. She was starting to understand. "Captain," she said during a brief pause in the fighting, I'm getting partial translations. They're panicking. They've never seen anything like us. Good, Hart replied. Fear makes people think twice. 11 minutes after the battle began, it was over. 37 alien warships drifted in space, their weapons destroyed, their engines dead. Not one had been killed. Not one human had been injured. Admiral Vexer stood on the bridge of the Crimson Fury and felt something cold spreading through his chest. His flagship had been spared, but only because the human ship had stopped firing. They had defeated his entire fleet and then simply ceased. A message appeared on his communication screen. Mathematical symbols at first, then words in a rough approximation of the Crimson language. We did not come to fight. We came to talk. Will you talk now? Vexer stared at the message. His hands trembled slightly, though he would never admit it. He was 300 years old. He had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds. He had never felt fear. He felt it now. The Resolute waited in silence, surrounded by the broken fleet, patient as stone. Captain Hart stood on his bridge and watched the alien flagship. He hoped they would choose to talk. He hoped violence could be avoided from this point forward. But he was ready, if it could not. Admiral Vexer did not respond to the human message. Instead, he sent an emergency transmission to the one place he never thought he would contact willingly. The Nova Empire. Their ancient enemies. Their eternal rivals. The message was simple. Something new has entered our space. Something we cannot defeat alone. The galaxy was about to change forever. News of the battle spread through the Crimson Empire like fire through dry grass. 37 warships defeated by a single vessel. An unknown species from uncharted space. Weapons that could not be stopped. Shields that could not be broken. Within hours, every commander in the Crimson Fleet had seen the recordings. They watched the small human ship dance through their formation, striking with precision that bordered on insulting. They watched their plasma beams splash harmlessly against blue energy barriers. They watched their proud warships reduced to drifting hulks, and they were afraid. On 1,000 conquered worlds, the slave species whispered among themselves. They had heard rumors of the battle through channels the Crimson thought were secret. A ship had come from beyond known space. It had fought the Crimson and won. For the first time in living memory, the Masters had lost. Hope is a dangerous thing. The Crimson Empire had spent millennia crushing it out of their subjects. But hope cannot be killed. It can only be hidden, waiting for the moment to return. That moment had arrived. Captain Hart did not know any of this. He stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the disabled alien fleet and waiting for a response to his offer of peace. The aliens had stopped shooting, but they had not started talking. Hours passed in tense silence. Commander Monroe approached with a cup of coffee. Real coffee from the ship's carefully maintained supplies. A small luxury, but an important one. You should rest, Captain, she said. You've been on the bridge for 16 hours. Hart accepted the coffee but shook his head. Not until we know what they're going to do. I didn't come all this way to miss the important part. Lieutenant Clark looked up from her station. She had been working without pause, analyzing every scrap of communication she could intercept. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, but her mind was sharp as ever. Captain, I've made significant progress on their language. The mathematical base helped, but I'm now picking up emotional context as well. And what I'm hearing is interesting. Tell me. They're terrified. Not just concerned or cautious. Genuinely afraid. The word they keep using for us translates roughly as impossible. They don't understand how we exist. Hart frowned. Hart frowned. Because of our technology? Partly. But there's something else. They seem shocked that we're biological. They expected I'm not sure exactly. Something different. Something they could understand. The mystery would have to wait. The tactical display lit up with new contacts. More ships were arriving, dozens of them, emerging from hyperspace on the edge of the system. But these ships were different. Their hulls were not red and black, but silver and blue. Their design was sleek and elegant, curved where the crimson ships were angular. New contacts, Brooks reported, tension in his voice. Different configuration. Different energy signatures. This isn't the same fleet. The Nova Empire, Clark said suddenly. That's what the Crimson called them in their transmissions. They're ancient enemies. They've been at war for thousands of years. Hart watched the new fleet take up position alongside the damaged Crimson vessels. The two groups did not fire on each other. They communicated briefly, then turned their combined attention toward the Resolute. They're working together, Monroe observed. Against us. We scared them enough to forget their war, Hart said. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. It was bad. The combined fleet began to move. Crimson and Nova vessels formed a single massive formation, hundreds of ships strong. They advanced on the Resolute slowly, methodically, giving the human ship nowhere to run. Admiral Vexer's voice crackled through the communication system, translated roughly by Clark's algorithms. Unknown vessel. You have been declared a threat to galactic stability. You will surrender your ship and your crew for processing. Resistance will result in your destruction. Hart looked at the fleet before him. The Resolute had defeated 37 ships with ease. Could it defeat 300? The math was less certain now. But Captain Daniel Hart had not traveled across the galaxy to surrender. Brooks, target priority, their largest vessels. Santos, I need shields at maximum and engines ready for combat maneuvers. Graham, you're cleared to fire at will. The bridge crew responded without hesitation. They had trained for years. They had crossed the void together. They trusted their ship, and they trusted their captain. The Resolute surged forward, directly into the heart of the enemy formation. What followed would be remembered in two empires for 1,000 years. Military academies would study the battle in detail. They would try to understand how one ship survived against such overwhelming odds. They would fail. The Resolute was simply better. Not a little better. Vastly, impossibly better. Human engineers had built something that the galaxy had never seen. A perfect fusion of speed, power, and precision. Railguns fired in continuous streams, punching holes through armor that had never been penetrated. Point defense lasers created a web of destruction around the ship, swatting missiles from the void like insects. The shields held against every weapon both empires could bring to bear. Hart commanded from the center of the storm, calling out targets and maneuvers with calm authority. Monroe coordinated damage control teams that had nothing to do. Santos kept the reactor stable, even as it output power levels that should have been impossible. Graham placed his shots with artistic precision, disabling rather than destroying. The enemy fleet tried to adapt. They changed formations. They concentrated fire. They attempted to ram the human vessel with their largest ships. Nothing worked. After 3 hours, the battle ended. The combined fleet of two galactic empires drifted in ruins. Ships with destroyed weapons tumbled slowly through space. Vessels with dead engines sat motionless in the void. Not a single ship retained the ability to fight, and still, the Resolute had not killed. Hart looked at the devastation surrounding his ship and felt the weight of what he had done. He had not wanted this. He had come in peace, hoping for friendship. But the galaxy had forced his hand. Open a channel, he ordered. All frequencies. Clark transmitted his words, translated into both Crimson and Nova languages. We are humans. We came from a distant star, seeking to meet others like ourselves. We did not want to fight. You gave us no choice. We have shown you what we can do. Now we ask again. Will you talk? Silence stretched across the void. Then, slowly, a response came. Not from Admiral Vexer, whose pride would not allow him to speak. Not from any military commander. The message came from the Nova flagship, from Empress Solara herself. We will talk, humans. We will talk. Hart allowed himself a small breath of relief. The first step had been taken, but he knew, deep in his heart, that the hard part was just beginning. The galaxy had seen humanity now. And the galaxy was afraid. Fear could become hatred. Hatred could become war. And war on a galactic scale would be something humanity could not survive alone. They needed allies. They needed information. They needed to understand what kind of universe they had stumbled into. The Resolute held its position, a single point of light in an ocean of defeated ships. Captain Hart stared at the stars and wondered what would come next. Whatever it was, humanity would face it, together. Empress Solara of the Nova Empire sat in her private chambers aboard the flagship Eternal Light. 4 eyes stared at the holographic display before her, replaying the battle footage for the 100th time. Her silver skin reflected the images of destruction. Her long fingers pressed together in thought. She was old by Nova standards, nearly 500 years. She had ruled her empire for 3 centuries. She had seen wars and plagues and disasters of every kind. She had made decisions that affected trillions of lives, but she had never seen anything like this. The human ship moved through her fleet as if her warriors were children. Their weapons did nothing. Their tactics failed. Their numbers meant nothing. 1 ship against hundreds, and the 1 ship won without effort. Her advisors wanted to flee. They counseled retreat to the heart of Nova space, to fortify their core worlds and prepare for invasion. But Solara had not survived 500 years by running from problems. She had agreed to talk. Now she would talk. On the Resolute, Captain Hart prepared for the meeting. He had never negotiated with aliens before. No human had. There was no protocol, no guidebook, no training that applied. He would have to rely on instinct and common sense. Commander Monroe helped him review everything they knew about the 2 empires. Lieutenant Clark had worked miracles with the translation algorithms, pulling together fragments of intercepted communications and prisoner interviews into a rough understanding of galactic politics. The picture was not pretty. 2 major powers, Monroe explained, pointing at a hastily assembled star chart. The Crimson Empire and the Nova Empire. They've been fighting for at least 3,000 years, though the war has been cold for the last few centuries. Between them, they control most of known space. And everyone else? Subjects. Slaves. Both empires have conquered hundreds of species. Some are treated better than others, but none are free. The Crimson are more brutal. The Nova are more subtle, but the end result is the same. Hart felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had stumbled into a galaxy ruled by slavers. 2 massive empires built on the suffering of others. How many people are we talking about? Clark answered this one. Based on the data I've gathered, population estimates for both empires combined are in the trillions. Maybe more. We're looking at a scale that makes human history seem tiny. Hart nodded slowly. Trillions of beings, most of them enslaved. And somewhere out there was Earth, small and alone and completely unaware of what was coming. The meeting took place on a neutral station, an ancient trading post that both empires had agreed to leave untouched. Hart brought Monroe, Clark, and a small security detail. He walked through corridors built for beings much larger than humans, past windows that looked out on alien stars. Empress Solara met them in a chamber of white stone and flowing water. She was tall, nearly 3 meters, with 4 arms and 4 eyes and skin that shimmered like mercury. Her robes were simple but elegant. She carried no visible weapons, though Hart had no doubt she was dangerous. Admiral Vexer stood beside her, representing the Crimson Empire. He was shorter than Solara, but broader, with red-scaled skin and a face that seemed designed for violence. His 3 rows of teeth were visible when he spoke, which was not often. He watched the humans with eyes that burned with barely contained rage. "You are the humans," Solara said. Her voice was musical, almost hypnotic. "You are the ones who have destroyed 2 fleets without losing a single vessel." "We defended ourselves," Hart replied. "We didn't want to fight. Yet you came into space you did not understand, armed with weapons beyond anything we possess. If you did not want to fight, why did you prepare for war?" It was a fair question. Hart had considered it himself many times. "Because the universe is dangerous," he said simply. "We hoped for the best and prepared for the worst. We wanted to meet others, to learn, to share knowledge. We still want that. But we will not be conquered. We will not be enslaved." Solara's 4 eyes studied him carefully. "You know about the empires. You know what we do to those we conquer. We learned. It was not pleasant knowledge. And yet you offer peace. Why? With your technology, you could destroy us both. You could free every slave in the galaxy." Hart shook his head. "1 ship. That's all we have. 1 ship, 300 crew, and a home world that doesn't know any of this exists. We're not here to conquer anyone. We're here to find our place in the universe." Vexer spoke for the first time, his voice a harsh growl. "Your place is beneath us. Every species finds its place beneath us, eventually." Monroe tensed beside Hart, her hand drifting toward her sidearm. But Hart remained calm. "Perhaps, but not today. Today, we talk." The negotiations lasted for hours. Hart learned more about the galaxy than he had ever wanted to know. He learned about the Crimson's genetic breeding programs, designed to create perfect slave races. He learned about the Nova's neural conditioning, which made their subjects incapable of resistance. He learned about the hundreds of species that had been erased from existence for the crime of refusing to submit. He also learned something that changed everything. "Earth," Solara said, leaning forward with sudden interest. "That is the name of your home world. We will meet its location." Hart felt ice run through his veins. "Why? You have demonstrated dangerous capabilities. Both empires agree that your species must be controlled. Your world must be brought into the galactic order. If you cooperate, your people will be treated well. If you resist," she gestured vaguely, "well, you have seen what happens to those who resist." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Hart looked at Vexer, whose teeth were bared in what might have been a smile. He looked at Solara, whose 4 eyes held no mercy. They had never intended to negotiate. This meeting was about one thing only: finding Earth. Hart stood slowly. Monroe and Clark rose with him, their faces carefully blank. "I think this meeting is over," Hart said. "It is over when I say it is over," Solara replied. "You will give us the location of your world, Captain. You will do this because you have no choice. Your ship is impressive, but it is 1 ship. You cannot protect your world forever." Hart smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You're right," he said. "1 ship can't protect Earth forever. But 1 ship can do something else. 1 ship can show every slave in your empires that resistance is possible. 1 ship can spread hope to 1 trillion beings who have forgotten what hope feels like. 1 ship can start something that both of your empires will never be able to stop." He turned and walked toward the door. His crew followed. "Consider this our answer, Empress. We will never bow. We will never submit. And we will never, ever stop fighting." The door closed behind them. Solara and Vexer sat in stunned silence. In the corridor, Monroe spoke quietly. "That was impressive, Captain. But we're still outnumbered by about 1,000,000,000 to 1. Hart nodded. "Then we'd better get home fast. We have a lot of work to do." The Resolute was waiting for them, floating in space like a promise. Hart looked at her familiar lines and felt something like hope stirring in his chest. Earth was far away. The odds were impossible. But humanity had faced impossible odds before. They would face them again, and this time, the galaxy was watching. The briefing room of the Resolute was silent. Every senior officer sat around the table, their faces grim. The holographic display showed the star chart Lieutenant Clark had assembled, now updated with everything they had learned. 2 massive empires, hundreds of conquered species, trillions of enslaved beings, and somewhere at the edge of the map, small and unmarked, was Earth. Captain Hart stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. He had not slept in 30 hours. None of them had. There was too much to discuss, too many decisions to make. "Let's start with the obvious," he said. "Both empires want to find Earth. Both empires want to conquer us. We are one ship, months away from home. Options?" Commander Monroe spoke first. "We run. Maximum speed, direct route home. We warn Earth about what's coming and give them as much time as possible to prepare. The empires will follow our trail," Lieutenant Brooks pointed out. "Their tracking technology might be inferior to ours, but they're not stupid. They'll find our hyperspace wake and follow it. We'd be leading them straight to Earth. What if we take an indirect route?" Chief Engineer Santa suggested. "Double back, create false trails, confuse them." Clark shook her head. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're already launching search probes in every direction. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They're mapping every hyperspace route in the sector. An indirect route might buy us time, but not much." Navigator Scott Palmer had been running calculations since the meeting with Solara ended. His eyes were bloodshot, his fingers stained with coffee. There might be another option. "The route we took to get here was inefficient. I was following the signal we detected, taking the safest path. But there are faster routes." Hart turned to him. "How much faster?" "Significantly. But they go through dangerous space, unstable regions, and—" Palmer hesitated. "They go through Crimson territory, right through the heart of it." The room fell silent again. Flying through enemy territory with 2 empires hunting for them. It sounded like suicide, but Hart was thinking about something else. He was thinking about the whispers Clark had intercepted during the battle. The rumors spreading through conquered worlds. The hope that had begun to stir. "What if we don't run?" he said quietly. Monroe frowned. "Sir? What if we fly straight through their territory? Not hiding, not running, fighting, showing everyone what we can do." Brooks caught on first. "Every world we pass, every slave species that sees us, they'll know resistance is possible. They'll know the empires can be beaten," Hart continued. "They'll know they're not alone. One ship can't free a galaxy, but one ship can start a revolution." Santos leaned forward, her engineer's mind working through the implications. "The Resolute can handle it. I've seen what our shields can take. I've seen what our weapons can do. But Captain, we're talking about flying through the most heavily defended space in the galaxy. There will be thousands of ships trying to stop us. Then we show them what one human ship can do against thousands." The decision was made. Not by vote, not by order, but by the slow nods of every person in the room. They were 300 humans, alone in a hostile universe, about to attempt something no one had ever done before. They were terrified. And they were ready. The Resolute turned toward Crimson space. Her engines burned bright, leaving a trail of light across the void. She did not try to hide. She flew openly, broadcasting her presence to every sensor that could detect her. The response was immediate. Crimson fleets converged from every direction. Warships, battle stations, automated defense platforms. Everything the Empire could bring to bear was thrown at the single human vessel. It was not enough. The Resolute tore through their defenses like a blade through paper. She destroyed weapons and engines, but not crews. She disabled stations and let them drift. She fought 100 battles in a dozen systems, and she won every single one. And everywhere she went, she broadcast the same message. Translated into 100 languages, transmitted on every frequency, repeated until no one could ignore it. We are humans. We come from a distant star. We will not bow. We will not submit. And neither should you. On conquered worlds, slaves looked up at the sky and felt something they had forgotten. The masters were not invincible. The masters could be beaten. Perhaps one day they could be free. Rebellions began to stir. Small ones at first. Workers refusing orders. Prisoners fighting back. But small rebellions grew. The seed of hope that the Resolute had planted began to spread. Empress Solara watched the reports flood in and felt something she had never experienced. Panic. Her empire was beginning to crack. 3 centuries of careful control were unraveling because of one ship. High Sovereign Malloys raged in his throne room, crushing servants and advisors alike. His ancestors had built an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy. Now it was threatened by creatures he had never heard of, from a world he could not find. The Resolute flew on. Through crimson space, through neutral zones, through regions marked as unexplored. Captain Hart stood on the bridge, watching the stars blur past, thinking about home. Earth was getting closer. 300 humans had crossed the void, fought impossible battles, and sparked the flames of revolution. Soon they would see blue skies and feel real wind on their faces. But Hart knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. The message he had sent to Earth ahead of them had been simple. We are coming. We are not alone. Prepare for everything. Earth would need to change. Humanity would need to grow. Faster, stronger, smarter. They would need to build more ships like the Resolute. They would need to find allies among the freed species. They would need to prepare for a war unlike anything in human history. Commander Monroe stood beside her captain as the Resolute entered the final stretch of her journey. What do you think they'll say when we get home? Hart smiled slightly. I think they'll say we're crazy. We probably are. Probably. But crazy has gotten us this far. The Resolute emerged from hyperspace on the edge of the solar system. Earth was a blue dot in the distance, small and fragile against the darkness of space. Hart looked at it and felt tears prick his eyes. They were home. Behind them, half a galaxy away, 2 empires scrambled to recover from what one human ship had done. Rebellions were spreading. Slave species were rising. The old order was beginning to crumble. And ahead of them, Earth waited, unaware of the storms that were coming, unaware of the role they would soon play in the fate of the galaxy. Captain Hart opened a channel to Earth. His voice was steady, even as his heart raced. This is the USS Resolute, returning from first contact. We have a lot to tell you. And when we're done, we have a question. He paused, looking at his crew. 300 souls who had crossed the stars and changed history. The galaxy needs us. The question is, are we ready to answer? The transmission ended. The Resolute glided toward Earth, toward home, toward a future that no one could have predicted. One human warship had arrived in alien space. Fear had reached the core of 2 empires. And now, for the first time, the universe would learn what humanity could truly become. The story was just beginning.